Hello, YouTube. A little pre-warning here. This episode depicts acts of extreme brutal violence. So, if you don't want to hear depictions of extreme brutal violence, then skip this one. It all loops around into narratives for books, though. But regardless, I know some people are triggered and some people don't want to hear about graphic violence. So tune away if you have sensitive ears, or I try to handle it gently, but you know how it goes once I get onto things sometimes. Anyway, it'll all make sense if you listen to it, but still, if you can't handle watching like mob violence, then this one's not for you. I don't do these warnings often, but I feel like I skirt that edge sometimes. And it's like a baseline. It's like a baseline. I explain it. But still, anyway. If they're now, you know. On with the show. Welcome back, everyone, to another fantastic episode of I'm Gonna Talk and You're Gonna Listen. So, let's see. New things since last time. For y'all coffee supporters out there, there's a new Homestead update video, so check that out. And still working on book cover stuff. I have enough credits left to do one more AI animated book cover. Just gotta figure out which one to do. Spending a lot of time on the indoor garden stuff, trying to learn every last little thing about getting these sproutlings to go. Organizing my mic here real quick. I'm trying to get it just perfect. Something like that. I think that's good. So, yeah, I got my first copies of Ghost Company 2 finally, and they were matte covers because, of course, I forgot again. I always forget. Nobody ever tells me. So, well, the first couple people, if anyone order the first couple, they get matte covers. So there you go. I like the matte more, but the glossy is like way easier to take care of. So I get a lot of when I finally get people that'll talk to me about my books. I get a lot of really interesting questions, and probably one of the most common questions I get kind of starts off simple enough. They ask how clean the book is, how clean the books are. I actually get this question a lot, and I forget. I don't know how many books aren't quote unquote clean. It usually means a couple different things. It usually starts off by meaning they don't want swears. And so in my books, for example, I have made up swears. Most authors use made up swears. Most authors realize that real swears look absolutely stupid. Stupid when you write them down. Just super cringe. Whereas you can make up your own swears and it just works better. Although if you try to run it by an editor, they'll tell you that's not a real word. No, it's not. Those aren't real words. Oh, shut up. So, that's usually not what they mean, though. I mean, that's part of it. But usually what they mean is they don't want it to be erotica, but they won't just tell you. that they don't want it to be erotica. So, or I think less often, what they also mean is they don't want torture, or just like, I don't know, gratuitous violence. And I've talked about like little bits of different bits and pieces of this in different podcasts, but I don't think I ever boiled it down into like a single cohesive thought. My books are like not only like a natural progression of an escalation of the story, but they're a natural escalation of me developing as a writer. And so as I got more comfortable with each component, I kind of timidly worked it into the books. And it creates like a natural, and I think like authentic and genuine, honest, natural progression. The first book starts very, very, very subdued and very modest. There's going to be a lot of spoilers. Unfortunately, people want me to spoil huge chunks of it before they'll read it, so without going into too many specifics, I'm going to try to explain like a lot of this kind of like intertwines around triggering also. That being said, as romantic as it is to want psychological safety in this world, the reality is that we don't really get a choice. And it's so easy to come up with these little bullshit quips about, well, the news is just propaganda. No, there's a difference between the news and facts and truth, right? Like, you can watch the news, ignore the propaganda, and still glean the facts. You can still understand the narrative. Understanding the narrative is very important because it's going to tell you where the winds flow. Understanding the facts is going to give you the statistics locally and nationally, and it's going to tell you times that are important to not go outside and times that it used to be safe but now it's more dangerous. You can separate all that from propaganda. You can say that that's fear-mongering, or you can understand the statistics behind it, or you can decide if the numbers that they're giving you are accurate or not, or if they're really going up or down. You can compare notes. You can learn a lot from the news, right? And there's people that say they don't want to watch the news, but they watch like global fear-mongering that there's nothing they can do with. So when you look at like the sheer horror of the news, and I don't mean propaganda, I don't mean the spin, I mean the facts. When you look at the facts and you realize that the news cycle is not even telling you even a shred of it, you can understand what the narrative is. That gives you a baseline, right? People don't want to, people aren't comfortable even really necessarily understanding the baseline, let alone the fact that there's people locked up in dungeons all the time, there's people trafficked all the time. Horrible things. Unspeakable things. Every day, right? So you've got your baseline, and then you've got your like most horrible stuff. No matter what I write about, what goes on in real life is 10 times worse. And the fact that it's all filmed and that people circulate these videos of these horrible things happening and trade them like trading cards is barbaric, right? We're dealing with real life, actual barbarians, not like the romantic, stoic barbarians. I mean, like animals, evil animals that look like people. So you might be wondering, like, oh, you brought all this up last time. What are you talking about? Well, what I usually don't talk about, though, covering this in novels, covering this in a narrative form, covering this how this happens in real life, is a challenge. And what I mean by that is, or let me go into that some more. Usually, like, the final act of each one of my books culminates in a ton of violence, and then everything's resolved, and then life goes on if everybody survives. There's a reason for that. It's not because everything needs to build to a crescendo and then have a payoff. It's actually because I am trying to earn the violence that happens. I'm trying to justify the response that the characters have to do. A lot of books just do not. Most books do not do that. Most movies don't even do that. They immediately start the movie with a ton of violence, or they start the book with a ton of violence and a ton of force because they know that that's what they need to hook people, and none of it's earned. Then they're like, no, let's rewind. And then you realize you've got 45 minutes of nothing that's about to happen. Deadpool. So tons and tons and tons and tons of books and movies are like this because people have the attention span of a goldfish. But here's the problem. Sooner or later, people get exhausted from violence. They get exhausted from force. They get exhausted from, like, the 24-hour news cycle of, you know, the chickens have ran amok again, and there's chickens in the streets, and everyone's chicken dancing, and it's total bedlam because the chickens, you know, people, they tune out. And I think that's a natural human nature. They tune out. And I think that's okay, except for the fact that then when it rolls up in their neighborhood, they're completely blindsided, and all their cutesy little phrases don't save them from anything. Living and existing in this world, if you want people to be blissfully ignorant and innocent and happy and have smiling faces, a segment of the population has to fight for that. You don't get it for free. You don't move to a small town and get it for free. It takes work and perseverance and everybody being ready all the time. And I think if that's one thing that maybe I fail in my books, is the reality is just gonna be so much worse. Civil unrest, the amount of protests and riots in the cities is so much worse. The immigrant illegal thing with the over the border is gonna be 10 times worse than what I wrote about. The homeless population is gonna be so, like, what the corporations are gonna be doing when they have completely eroded everybody's rights away to nothing is gonna be so much worse. The divide between the rich and the poor it's AI is all going to be way worse than what's in my books. My books are kind of like the stepping stones to like justify the response. And I don't think real life's going to be like that. Real life is going to be fast and it's going to be brutal when the normies wake up. Because they're emotionally based and they default to whatever works for them the most, which is just emotion and frustration and lashing out. But until then, everything's usually very predictable. Violence is usually predictable. There's usually signs. There's usually clenched fists. There's usually a natural escalation in people's voices. Like there's that gut instinct that you have. There's the universe trying to tell you that something's wrong. People usually have to actively ignore that thing or be goaded into some false sense of security or drugged or something. So my books all have a nice natural progression where the bad thing that's happening is like earned. It's explained. The person has time to be like, okay, this is the bad thing happening. I hear them saying those things. Those things, since I watched the news, I know what those things typically mean, so I can discern the next thing that's about to happen. And, I have a few minutes to prepare for the violence because I've been able to read all the signs. Until things get worse, that's still how things work now 99% of the time. People know typically when things are off because they know the baseline. If you look in 99% of like mass casualty videos, there's indicators. There's pre-attack indicators, unless you're in like a war zone, then it's just the Jeep driving up, blah blah, blowing through the checkpoint. There's usually attack indicators. You can learn to read them. People just have to want to pay attention and stop foolishly believing that everything's going to be fine. That doesn't mean you can live in a constant state of paranoia, because then you'll just get worn out. But just like when a nuke's going to go off, you don't know if you're going to be ground zero or if you're going to be on the edge or out on the outskirts or somewhere in the middle, but you just have to plan as if you're going to survive just in case you do, so you can escape or grab a couple people out of the rubble and run. It's going to be bad. But if people would just realize the natural progression of violence, they could train and plan accordingly. And I know a lot of this is from another content creator / trainer / former special ops named Sonny Pizakis. And he explains this a million times better than me. I wasn't in the military, right? How he explains it is that people's threat response is usually based on how much training they have, because training gives them options. If you don't train, if you don't practice, if you're not physically and mentally prepared, you run out of options and you tend to make bad decisions. So whoever's coming after you, all they have to do is make less mistakes than you. So whether they're trying to close the distance and you catch their friend out of the corner of their eye, whether they pull up and say that they lost their puppy, or they're asking for directions and want you to come closer to your car. It's just how close to you, how far they can get and slide under your defenses, right? But they have endorphins running through their body too. They're excited too. It's really easy to say that you're going to stay calm. But when energy is flowing through your body, it's organic and it's very hard to control unless you train under stress and pressure a lot, which is why they usually say it's the calm person that you have to look out for, because it's the calm person that's done it before. It's the calm person in the crowd when everybody's freaking out that's the scariest one. And what's that mean? It means that they've done it before. It means that they are able to control the energy flowing through them, the whatever chemical it is. They're able to control it, right? Whereas everybody else is like freaking out. So anyway, on both sides, this is why you get boomers driving into crowds and then getting stuck and then just stopping as they get murdered. This happens every weekend in almost every major city. Some boomer tries to drive through a street shutdown, and each news agency calls it something else. Some of them call them sideshows, some of them call them street takeovers or whatever. I used to think they weren't a big deal, but after talking to my brother about it, I realized it's a slippery slope, and they've now got much worse. So, I tell everybody, you have to be able to recognize it, stop, and slowly and carefully back out so you can avoid them. Street lockdowns are insanely dangerous. For not just people trying to drive through, but for everybody there. You could get hit by a car, you could get hit by, other street lockdown people shooting around. But people get frustrated. They've always driven through that intersection and they want to drive through that intersection again because that's what they always do, and they get their boomer entitlement. But they're not able to assess the situation. And most boomer guys completely shut down as soon, they think they're some badass and I wish a mother effer would. It's boomer guys that are the first people to shut down when violence pops off. And then they're old ladies, bless their hearts, followed them in because that's what they do, bless them. And then there's nothing they can do, and all of a sudden they're in a pack of wild hyenas. And what these people do to the boomers is horrible. They'll beat them unconscious and they'll just keep beating them, and it's horrible. And to see it is horrible. And this sucks, right? So how do you portray this in a book? Like, you think about the shock value of people being beat unconscious and then still beaten to the point of the person trying to murder them. Like, you can only see this so many times before it F's with you. It changes something in you. And this is a hard problem with all the race baiting going on, because once you've seen a different ethnicity kill your ethnicity so many times, it changes something in you that you have no or very little control over. And I think it took me seeing that to realize that I'm sure it's something similar that the other side sees as well. Which, side note, is why we all have to come together, which is the point of my stories. But how do you, when you're writing stories, how do you write those escalations without it just being for shock value? Right? Do you can leave some of the embellishments out, but it's a challenge. You can use it to establish they're a really bad guy so they get their comeuppance, but at some point most people just can't handle that brutality. They will actually pass out because most people can't handle that level of brutality. And so in my books, to the best of my knowledge, I think I try to stop myself from getting to what I call overkill. Where the person's done, but people keep going. I think that's done a lot for shock value to kind of show that the person's crossed that line and turned into a monster. And so I think at least in animation, it's kind of lost its meaning because a lot of people will cross that bridge and then they still try to make the character redeemable. And I think after you've crossed that bridge, you're not redeemable anymore. You're some kind of executioner or a psychopath or something if you can do that to another living being. So it's important for you as an author to understand where that line is, so you're not throwing things in your book for reasons that you don't mean to, and also so you don't overuse it, ? Because if you just keep writing violent, brutal scenes over and over and over, people are gonna tune out because they just don't need to see it. There's a very, very small subset of people that have that level of darkness to where they can see that stuff and they've either become desensitized to it or they just have no emotions. So you need to keep that in mind when you're writing, that your good guy has to stop at a certain point, or people are not going to empathize with your good guy anymore. The bad guys, if you're just going to be having them brutally murder people, it's going to be hard for you to come back from that as well, because then what do you have happen to those people? Something equally horrible and violent? Like, where do you plan on coming back? Because you can't, the person, there won't be like reconciliation, right? And you can't have the good guy do like the equally horrible thing back to the bad guy, unless you're writing like a Punisher character. Maybe you're running like a Punisher character or something. Like, I don't know. Or maybe you're writing, more like a Ghost Rider. And he plans on sentencing them and sending them down to the abyss. But I think that's part of what some readers are afraid of. They're afraid of actual visceral violence, to where they don't want to feel like they've actually watched or read somebody getting actually murdered, because it's horrible, and it should be horrible. I think us as human beings, I think it's perfectly natural for us to reject that. So I don't think it should be taken lightly when you write. The very first really visceral movie I remember watching was Smokin' Aces. Like, the carnage and brutality in that movie was nuts. But it wasn't until I saw this like attempted spin-off of Mortal Kombat, or actually, well, even like, the first Robot Jocks movie. What did we used to call that? The animes had a name for that. I think just this weird like mechanical like torture embellishment that just takes you to these like horrible dark places, and it's just like you can't go there over and over again, because coming back from it's just emotionally draining. It's typically not what people want to read about, and because again, I think it's natural to want to avoid those things. And I think I would argue, most importantly, that to get the point across, you don't need to go that far in fiction. But you might think to yourself, but Chance, when I was taking my driver's ed course, they made us watch people get hit by trains and crawl out and die. Yeah, I remember that. That was kind of weird. There was really not much escalation to that. It was like, these are just dead bodies from then. Remember, don't park your car in the train tracks. That was weird. I guess they thought that was okay. I don't know. But they don't make you watch Boeing 747s fall out of the air every time you get on a plane. I think you have to have a natural, organic direction that you plan on getting there, and then their actions of your character have to be reasonable in proportion. But the thing is, unfortunately, that's not what real life works. Like when you have adrenaline pumping through your system, you don't know how many bullets you shot. Most people, unless you're St. Kyle, don't roll around with an AR and pull off perfect shots. Like that's extremely rare. People do all kinds of crazy things under adrenaline if they don't train. Or if they're hurt or wounded or in fear for their life, they do all kinds of crazy things. And they'll misremember all of it, which is why you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can will be used against you in a court of law. Don't talk to cops. I mean, you gotta tell them something. But like, I had to defend myself. That guy was attacking me. I was in fear for my life. And I did what I had to do to stop him. And now you're here, and now I want to get out of here and talk to a lawyer. So how your protagonist defends themselves, unless there's some kind of contract killer, Agent 47, John Wick kind of a thing. If they're just your average Joe citizen, they're also going to be freaking out afterwards. If it's the first time that they've taken somebody's life, they're going to be freaking out because that's a mind F. Like, writing in SHTF books, writing like a relatable protagonist that's like a street person, like just a street level average citizen, like rising to the occasion, is very, 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 very different from writing a military person. Whereas like writing military people, they might jump straight from point A to point B and take care of business. Or they might have a much, much, much wider range of responses that they could potentially employ. Just like somebody with 10 different things in their EDC, like they might have their pepper spray and their pen and their flashlight and a sidearm. But here's the thing, and this, I don't talk about my dreams a lot, but a lot of my dream stuff goes into my books. In my dreams, I kind of use whatever's around me when I'm sleeping. So, but in my dreams, my pistols usually don't work. Or they do work, but they have no effect. But other people's pistols in my dreams don't seem to have any effect either. And in my last dream I had earlier, my pistol wasn't working, and I used my flashlight. And you might be thinking like, whoa, you just lost me. What are you talking about? Well, when you're in a self-defense scenario, like, you're just gonna use whatever the thing is the most comfortable for you. If you use a pen all day to write stuff down, no matter what you want to do, you might end up pulling your pen out. If you're using your flashlight to look in and around things all the time, your flashlight might be what comes out. If you have the wrong kind of pepper spray because people don't like you to have this or that kind of pepper spray, and so your pepper spray falls in the bottom of your pocket, and you know that you can never, ever, ever get that pepper spray out. It's just useless, but you have it in there to have it, even though there's no way to ever get it out in time. You might grab your flashlight in one hand, and you might grab your pen in the other. And the person attacking you might look at you like you're really stupid and think you're an idiot and turn around and walk away. Or you might pull out your pen and your flashlight and blind them in one eye and just rip them apart with your pen. Like, you don't know. Right? You don't know. They don't know. You have to train thousands of times for something to become muscle memory. And there's still a good chance under stress that you just pull out whatever thing you're the most used to pulling out. It could be your car keys. And I think your dreams tell you a lot about that. And like that's why I like a lot of those women's self-defense classes where they go, take your keys out and put your keys in between your knuckles and try to punch them in the eyes. No, that's just like the stupidest thing in the world. Like, girls are the same way. They're gonna just do whatever thing. If they're a kicker, they're gonna kick. If they're a biter, they're gonna bite. Like, they're gonna do whatever the thing is. And so that's why a lot of gals will joke around. They're like, oh, I had a lot of older brothers or whatever. I wrestled with my older brothers all the time. There's a lot of gals that'll just straight up tell you, like, I had a lot of older brothers. I wrestled with them all the time. I know how to fight somebody bigger than me. I know what it's like to take a punch. There's a lot of gals that don't, though. There's a lot of gals that grew up privileged, never having to fight, but, you know, they've been told from all these stupid-ass movies that a woman can fight a grown-ass man when it's not true. They get knocked in the Stone Age. Just stand there and take it. So I think all of these things can derive more realistic characters in your books. And this is what I try to do. And so when people ask me if my books are clean, what I tell them is, like, they get more violent the further in you go. There's a lot of ways that my stories progress the further in you go. There's going to be supernatural stuff further in. There's a lot of Christian type people that don't like supernatural stuff. They think, and maybe rightly so, that by reading or watching or having supernatural stuff around that it's going to open a portal and let things in. I personally think there's some truth to that. At least earlier on, I tried to explain in my books, hey, there's going to be supernatural stuff in this one. I probably do not do as good of a job. The reality is I just haven't had a good chance to sit down and explain each of my books at the beginning of each book. I don't like spoilers. I want people to go into my books going in with absolutely nothing so they can be surprised and unravel the mystery. I personally feel like people have gotten way too fragile. And so if things get more adult in later books, I feel like they organically progress there. I don't understand why. Well, no, I do. But there's these book series where everything is just static. There's no progression, but it's because the author has already grown to a baseline. And so they don't push the envelope. They don't push the boundaries anywhere. They don't push themselves. Every book I wrote was me trying to advance in, like, a new direction. And even the very end of my very first story, I rewrote it like 15 times, 20 times, trying to make sure that ending felt earned. Almost like my main character had to go to court, or you know, he has to be able to sleep at night. Your main character has to sleep at night. They're going to have PTSD, they're going to have nightmares, they're going to be shaking. And I feel like if you add these things, it adds some of the context. I don't know, it makes the whole thing feel earned a little bit more by not having gratuitous, senseless, embellished upon violence. Because violence out of context is just shock. It doesn't get anyone anything. There's no lesson, there's no value, there's no redemption arc or purpose. You know? It's just shock. And I think that's why I didn't like horror movies. Because I don't like shock for the sake of shock, to release endorphins in a controlled environment for no reason. I just don't think it adds any value. It's escapism for people to feel some fear, but just have your fear arbitrarily triggered. I don't think that's very different from stimulating any of your other senses for absolutely no reason. I think our bodies haven't evolved to the point to where they can understand the stimuli that we are able to experience. Our bodies can't put it into perspective, be it like fight or flight, burnout, like you name it. Like, our bodies just can't, they can't handle it. Like, that's why the corporate environment is so messed up. That's why toxic bosses are so messed up. It's why mobs and these nightly purges, it's why all this is so messed up. We're kind of only really good at like one mode, and that mode is like immersive, and then us getting out of that mode again. So if you go back in time, like something violent happens, you stop the violence goes away, then everything goes back to normal. But that's not the way things are anymore. You have to defend yourself, and then you're just living with the consequences for years and years and years and years. They disarm you, and then you're just living with the consequences in constant fear and going to court, and then slowly keep going bankrupt and then losing everything. Like, our bodies are meant to deal with that. Usually, you club somebody, then life goes on. That's not the way the world works, right? If you have a toxic boss, you're stuck with that toxic boss potentially for years, and there's no recourse because HR defends them and defends the company, and they leave you out to dry. They talk about psychological safety, but you're dealing with some of the most toxic people on the planet that there's nothing you can do about, and then they tell you to go touch grass. And how do you juxtapose the end of the world with that? Right? That's why the purge always misses its mark. It's good for what it is, but the reality is like, and even this Civil War movie that's coming out, I'm sure it's going to be this way too. Like, I think I brought this up before. Like, there isn't any movies where it's like, what if medicines? What if there's no medicine? What if there's no cat food? What if there's no power? What if there's no electricity? Like, they always gloss over this stuff. But you can naturally progress in your books and stories through, like, imagine there's somebody coming down the road you have to be able to identify who that is. So do you have a scope? Do you have a radio? Do you leave a radio on the other side? Like, you can write all this stuff down. All these things can go in your book, and then your character can, like, naturally progress through the thought process that it takes to get there. And I feel like that resonates way more with your potential audience, at least if they have two brain cells to rub together. I think they'll appreciate that you reach the potentials for violence organically, other than just some of these movies where they just have very, very, very exploitative scenes for shock value because they need to be able to justify horrible things happening to these people later. And it just comes off as this weird, like, voyeuristic abuse kind of thing where you're like, oh great, well I feel like I need a shower now. That was really uncomfortable. But the thing is, you're not gonna win them all. You're gonna say and do things that trigger people. But what you have to try to do is you have to try to earn it. Give your characters as much foresight as you can. And so, like, do they have, there's a roaming motorcycle gang. Do they have binoculars? Do they have early warning systems? Do they have a gut instinct? Do they have a dog that barks? And each one of these things is going to be a cue to your reader that something's going to happen, and their body can get prepared for it. Their body can go through the emotions. You don't want to explain it too slow, but you want to explain it slow enough to where their body is releasing the chemicals to be along for the ride. And I think that's why the vast majority of nudity in shows just is weird now. Like, it doesn't flow any natural. It doesn't flow like anything natural. It's just exploitative and voyeuristic and weird, and like, okay, that was weird. Why did that happen? And it's the same thing with violence. And conflict can just be as simple as someone slamming their hand down on the table. Like, I wish our force could just be like opening a door really hard. Slamming a door. Soft power versus hard power. Like, it's in swearing, and I think that's how swearing has to. I think that's where swearing circles back in. I just don't think most authors get this. And I hope that I get more feedback from people who want quote unquote clean books. Because I think I wanted to say this at the beginning. When I went and tried to like look up like a hard and fast definition for what a clean book was, I couldn't find one. And I remember bringing this up before, where they have these young adult shit, it's the fan books, where it's just like wildly unrealistic, or it turns into some kind of like teen romance drama thing. I'm like, if you think there's going to be teen romance drama when this shit hits the fan, you're sorely mistaken. Yeah, like everyone's going to be in cages being trafficked if they can't defend themselves. And it's just like, I know these things just aren't talked about in polite society, but you're writing a shit as the fan book. I'm gonna hit stop and refill my water really quick. Alright, now that I got the violence part out of the way, I think I want to talk about the hanky-panky adult situations, or erotica, or smut, or whatever. So there wasn't any good documentation on this when I started either. So I kind of felt like I had to naturally progress to where I sort of earned being able to put in adult situations. So where the violence kind of slowly ramps up through each book up until like the culmination, and the rest is usually fairly chill, I think. The adult hanky-panky is what in the industry they call fade to black, or implied, all the way through like book 15. And what happened is, a lot of people were telling me, we want to know what happens in the cities. We want whole books that happen in the cities. And I remember telling them, like, yeah, but that's going to be really bad. No, we want to know. Write whole books about what happens in the cities. I'm like, geez, okay. And it is a challenge, right? Because the cities are going to be more violent. There's going to be more depravity. There's going to be people starving. The violence in all shapes and sizes is just going to be worse. So you're not really doing anybody any favors by sugarcoating the violence in the cities. Otherwise, then you've just built them up to not be any old thing. And if you've been to any one of the big cities lately, they talk them up to say they're fine, but they're really not. And so how do you tackle that, right? So I talk about the violence stuff a bit already. I think once you've set the setting, people understand, they get immersed. They're like, all right, I'm in the city, things are bad, they're broken up into regions. There's going to be bad people, then there's going to be really bad people. And then if you kind of have the city naturally progress, you can kind of like ease them in to the violence that's going to be happening, but give them a character that's realistic enough to where it grounds them, but give that character enough backstory and experience to where it's believable, and to where their actions are going to be believable. And I build that up like in story number 6. You know, I build characters that are pretty badass, but their goal is always to get out. Anyone in the city, I always told everybody this, my characters aren't trying to survive in the cities. All my characters are trying to get out. That was the whole point. That's fine. I'm like, but it's going to get kind of boring. No, it won't. And I think it resonated with people reading characters trying to get out of the city and successfully getting out of the city. And so I'm like, okay, well, I can do that. Well, by book 15, it was kind of like, well, what happens if characters get stuck in the city? How long can they survive in the city? Like, what ingredients have to take place, right? And then if it's over a longer period of time, then you can allow relationships to evolve. But you still don't necessarily need hanky-panky, smut, erotica going on. Similarly, how people bring this up very commonly is that you don't write every time your characters go to the bathroom. You don't write every time your characters eat. Because you don't need to have those things unless something story-worthy happens. You just don't. So if you're going to have them go to the bathroom, is it because something compromising is going to happen? Then you're going to have to make sure you build up to that and earn that. If there's going to be some hanky-panky smut going on, why? The characters have to evolve somehow because of it. Or something has to happen that has a story beat in it. Or it has to be earned for some reason, just like violence. They need to earn their smutty smut time. But then in the shit is the fan, like, how is it even safe enough for them to do that? How do they know they're not going to be ambushed? And maybe a part of that's just like my generation, that they just had it burned into us that the second you do hanky-panky, like, someone's going to try to straight up murder you. Something horrible is going to happen. And I grew up believing that. That's a huge core of my childhood. Thinking that in intimate situations, or actually even just walking from point A to point B with a girl, that you were going to get clubbed over the head and she was going to get taken from you, and so you just had to be prepared for these eventualities. This is when I was a kid. Think about how things are now. I mean, this side note, this blows my mind that they allow high school kids to go march around and protest. If you want to keep kids safe, and if you're worried about trafficking, you would never let a bunch of high school girls start walking around outside the school. That's just insane to me. And that happens all the time. When I was a kid, that did not happen. The shit would have hit the fan. Like, they locked the parking lots. They locked the parking lots. We could not leave. And if they found out that we left, they didn't get paid. And this is like a huge tangent now. Suffice it to say, like, it was burned into me that if you were gonna go do the romance, that you were gonna get murdered. And so I think that's like a very accurate, fair consideration if you're gonna be writing a shit as the fan book, is how do your characters even feel like they're safe enough to do that? So I forget what it's called, but there's like your natural needs have to be met before you engage in hanky panky anyway. So if you're not being fed and sheltered, it just doesn't your system just doesn't work because it has other priorities anyway. And so I think like that small bit of justification maybe is a part of that whole cleanliness thing. Like, I want your books to be clean. It's like, well, I think my characters have earned a little romantic interlude, okay? Like, they've worked hard to build their shelter. Okay? They've worked hard to defend their shelter. They like each other. Like, they've earned some romantic time together. You know? Like, maybe you don't have to write every detail. Maybe you can have it all fade to black. If you're, if there's no story beats that need to happen. But, if the gal is like, that was a weird noise. But if the gal's gonna conk him out and take his stuff, you have to write a little bit of what's gonna happen. You can't just have it fade to black if she's gonna drug him and take some of his stuff and open the door for the bad guys or something. So I think, I'm still waiting to hear, some feedback on somebody who wants quote unquote clean books, which is actually some of the feedback that I got when I was asking readers what they wanted. But I don't find as many people looking for clean books as I did for everything else. It was maybe like 1 or 2 people versus an overwhelming amount of readers do not bring up wanting a clean book, quote unquote. So I think you can earn the romance, the romantic interludes, but then justify them by there being some point, it either being a reward or there being a story beat that happens during it. I think you can earn it and justify it, just like violence. I think it's the same if it's what I call unconsensual. I think it's the same way. I think authors come off as really, really, really creepy when they just write that into all their books and it's not justified. And there's no story beats because of it. They're just kind of creeps. I think it's the same thing with kids. I find it really weird. I found it really weird that there's a big chunk of authors out there that think young adult genre just means having young adults in the story. That is not at all what I think a young adult book is. I think young adult is the grade level that you're writing at. Whether you're writing at an elementary school level or like preschool, like Dr. Seuss, or writing at high school level or writing at college level or whatever. So I think a lot of authors miss that, and they're just trying to find ways of being creepy. And I think that's like a line that every author has to tread kind of on their own, so they don't end up like very certain extremely, extremely creepy authors that are out there that write very, very, very creepy things and get away with it. You have to make sure that you're not staining yourself by writing down some of the descriptive things that you write down. I call them like stains. I don't know how else to describe it. But I've always been really careful what I wrote down. And nobody's ever accused me of being creepy. So I think some people can be silly sometimes when they read it, and I think they like to tease. And that's been kind of annoying. That's actually happened more with my artwork. Like, you can't just have like playful artwork without people wanting to tease you, then you can never really figure out if they're being genuine or not. It's like, do you actually have a problem with this? Because you just seem like you're teasing. So I think when you write, well, I mean, I think when they read what you write, you're going to get more visceral responses the more immersed they are. And if you earn it, it's not going to be a reflection of you. It's going to be a naturally progressing story. And I can't really say any of those things out loud. And I've never seen anybody else write the rules down either. It's usually a discussion. And you just gotta be really, really careful. That's why the majority of writers and authors and cartoonists and TV show and whatever, just to cover their bases, they're just like, everybody's 18 or older, period, no matter what. I think that kind of limits the types of stories that you can write, but I think it can get way too fuzzy way too quick if you're a hack. And there's one comic book / cartoon guy. I'm not going to say his name because I don't want to go to jail and get sued for $1 bajillion. But he writes stuff that is absolutely inappropriate. And he knows it. And everybody knows it. And he gets a pass for some reason. And the shit that he writes is just garbage. It's smutty, inappropriate garbage. And he just doubles down and keeps writing more and more weird, inappropriate stuff, and it's somehow managed to hit mainstream. And I think not a lot. I think there's a fringe of authors and comic book artists who have tried to make inappropriate stuff mainstream for a while now. And it seems to be like the one thing that everyone, like almost everyone unilaterally agrees, like, don't be weird with the whole kid thing. It just gets too weird. But here's the problem. If you're trying to naturally progress as an author, sooner or later, you're going to want to have a story with a kid in it, right? So it's the same thing as everything else. You got to naturally work your way up to it, and you got to earn whatever happens. So it's a challenge, right? Like there are some like Shit Hits the Fan books. No, not books, movies. It's actually an Australian movie. And I think it handles it like really well. It's like the apocalypse, and this guy finds a girl and rescues her, and they go through the apocalypse together as he tries to find her family. And they handle it really, really, really well. I think it's one where there's like Australia's like the last continent to get hit by the fireball, so they know what's going to happen. And I think that's there's more than that. I can't necessarily think of the rest of them. But the whole, like parent where adult without the kid finds the kid and helps the kid through the apocalypse, like I think that's a perfectly viable story that you can keep on a trail that doesn't get weird. And I think I think it raises like a lot of interesting questions, like how, like what does trust mean? Like, do you try to offload the kid as fast as possible to somebody else? Like, what do you do? In fact, I was just watching Parasite, the Japanese version of Parasite, and the main character gets handed like a baby. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting. Are they gonna have him have the baby now? He's like in high school or something, or college. I don't know if he's in high school or college. Like I'm not sure like the school that he goes to, because those parts aren't translated. But it kind of comes off as high school. I'm like, so is he gonna have this baby now? But then yeah, he like turns he turns right around and gives it to the police. I'm like, oh, okay. That would have been weird, because it was like a newborn. I'm like, are they gonna have this kid like go try to find goat milk? Like, what's he gonna do? But no, he still has to go through his studies and stuff. Anyway, oh, that was interesting. So like in Shit Hits the Fan, like, what do you do? And actually, I end up exploring that in like more than one book. And each book, whenever I run into something, if I find that there's like kind of two ways to handle something, it'll show up in each book differently. So the other one handles babies like a different way. And I was like reading about how tribes like knew how many babies they could technically sustain. So if some other gal from another tribe lost their baby, they would give the baby from the one tribe to the other tribe if that tribe had lost a baby, because they knew how many they could feed based on how good their crops were doing and stuff. And I thought that was like really interesting. So yeah, if you really put thought into it, you can write in potentially sensitive topics and earn them without being weird, without creating some kind of Hollywood fantasy, because Hollywood's gonna Hollywood, as a couple of different YouTubers like to say. Hollywood's gonna Hollywood. Netflix is gonna Netflix. And you don't want to be associated with that, because that's just creepy. So, I don't know. Nobody's come by and said my books are creepy, so that's good. But people have said that some of the violent scenes were triggering. But they kind of admitted after they calmed down that it was triggering because it was so real. and I won't spoil which one it was, but I was like, "Yay?" Question mark. I'm like, I guess that's good. I'm like, I feel bad, but I guess that's good. I mean, at least didn't feel exploitive, right? Like, that's what I'm always worried about. I don't want people to feel like I'm exploiting bad things that have happened. But it's got a lot of supernatural stuff in it too. It's like it I think the worst that things get, I think the more people are going to go back to their superstitious roots. I don't think everybody's going to necessarily revert back to the good book. I think people are going to revert back to whatever works for them or whatever controls their fears. So, I don't know. People are going to get more visions. People are going to have more gut instincts. And the people that are surviving longer just organically are going to be following whatever's got them that far. Some of them it's going to be the book, and some of them it's going to be other stuff. But I've noticed a lot of Christians just reject that because that's not the message that they want to read. So I think that's another part of the whole cleanliness thing. Like, they want. I think there seems to be a propensity that in the shit it's the fan there's going to be a nuclear family and there's not, or that they're all going to be the same ethnicity and they're not, or that religion's just going to magically work itself out and everyone's going to gravitate towards Christianity, but they're not. There's going to be a resurgence of the church, sure, but there's going to be a resurgence of everything else too. And one of the biggest things that led me to write these books is that you're going to have to be getting along with people that don't believe the same things as you. And a huge chunk of it boiled back to an argument we had with who we thought was a good friend for a long time, and he just didn't believe that witch doctors were a thing. I was like, dude, if you've got a prepper group and one of the people is a witch doctor, what are you going to do? And he just rejected the whole thing. He's like, no, it's not possible. I'm like, but it is. Well, they won't be a real witch doctor. I'm like, who decides if they're a real witch doctor or not? Like, I told the witch doctor, he told me what to do. He said to like, if this person's a functioning member of your group, like, are you gonna sacrifice that asset? Like, it's a really thought-provoking question. And those are the questions that I try to bring up in the books, like, are you going to accept somebody who is a furry? Are you going to accept somebody who got kicked out of their feminist group? You know, are you going to accept a bunch of college brats who have different ways of going about things than you, or didn't maybe grow up the same? Are you going to be able to coexist with people who got kicked out of the military under questionable circumstances? These are all questions that my books provide, but they don't really have a lot of good answers, except for the fact that we've all got to be able to stick together somehow. So, wanting a book with like good, clean Christian morals, I think just gets people stuck in the echo chamber that they're going to have, a nice church group full of preppers to pick from, and not many church groups are actually like that. Very few are. I mean, it would be interesting to be a fly on the wall and see if some of those more hardcore, like, fundamentalist churches actually make it all the way through intact. You know, there's a lot of churches that are like prepper groups, but if they've never been tested, you don't know how they're going to act. And they might not have a diverse set of skills. They might be really good at food, and they might be really bad at defense. They might be really bad at radios. It takes like a diverse group of people to survive, period. So, kind of getting off on a tangent again. But I think I covered the big ones. There has to be a natural progression. If you let somebody into the group who is not like the rest of the group, there has to be like a natural progression. It doesn't even necessarily mean that there has to be a conflict with every single person that joins the group. It could just be, hey, we've got an extra room. They're going to sit in there and be quiet for themselves, and eventually they'll come out and sit with the group and find their place to fit in. And a lot of that's what happens starting in book 15. Because book 15 finally has enough kind of room to breathe. But that's why I tell people, like, you can get like halfway through my stories without having to deal with a lot of that. Because until book 15, there wasn't really enough room to breathe to have those longer form discussions of how do you deal with somebody who's been traumatized. You know, how do you regain somebody's trust who just got attacked by somebody else? So I tell people, like, you can get quite a ways in without having to deal with that stuff, and then you can make the decision yourself. And so I think if you're an author out there, like, I would strongly consider not putting your ultra-violent stuff at the beginning. I would consider you reflecting really hard if you're earning your ultra-violence and if you're earning your smutty smut. And if there's any kid stuff, making sure that you walk that line, not be weird, and not just have horrible stuff happen to animals for shock value, and just try to do your best to make it organic and to make actions have consequences, whether they're good or bad. And to me, that's what a clean book is. You don't have torture for the sake of torture. You don't sit there and dwell on negativity. And you kind of keep things going at a steady clip. You only slow down when you need to slow down. You only describe more when you need to slow down. And when you need to speed things up because nothing happens, it's okay to skip a little bit. Just make sure you write enough to where you don't lose people. So if you need to time jump, make sure that you have explained that the seasons change. If you need to slow things down, have everyone cleaning their pistols. If it's been a while and there hasn't had food, describe how everybody's lost some weight. Just earn what you've got. I probably don't do a perfect job at this, but I certainly try. If there's really, really, really bad people out there, you can explain it without embellishing it and without getting too graphic. Because you're gonna burn people out. You're gonna emotionally wear people out, and they're not gonna have any more emotion to invest. And that triggering moment will be like a gravity well in the middle of your book. and they won't remember anything other than character XYZ dying horribly, or character XYZ having some unjustifiable brief intimate moment that didn't seem to vibe with the rest of the story. Or having the intimate moment and then immediately dying. I've seen that before too, where a character will have like a really intimate moment with another character and then they'll just die in the next scene. And it's like, well, that feels unnecessarily exploitive. There was no consequences for them having that romantic interlude. And now they're just going to be even more dead inside. So the director can put those things in there, and if that's their vision, that's their vision. But how are you as the consumer of the content have to decide if that content's exploitative or if it makes sense. And I think I'll leave you with this. I think I was talking about these Outer Limits episodes that are uncensored a couple episodes ago. And there's this one where they cut out all the nudity, which is whatever. But in the nude scene, the main character turns down the advances of the nude gal that's trying to entice him. And in the cut version, it's just implied that they have romantic time. But in the cut, in the unedited version with the nudity, he turns her down. And it completely changes his character later when he decides to stay with the other gal and try to raise their kid together. Because then you know that he didn't cheat on her, he turned the other gal down. And so the writers, the director had a very, very, very clear point for that intimate scene. And by cutting that intimate scene, you lose a chunk of the story that's pivotal to the character's development. So, that's one way to look at it. If you're going to put those intimate scenes in, have them serve some kind of purpose. Besides just voyeuristic pandering. I can't think of the right word. Voyeuristic kind of exploitation. Anyway. I try to walk that line. I guess it's up for the readers to decide, but so far only one person's read the whole thing, so I guess I'll find out. Anyway, I've been talking for kind of the requisite amount of time and covered kind of the two topics I wanted to cover, and check out my books and my Ko-fi page. And I know it's kind of weird to be talking about the end of the world and then saying, but hey, buy my books. But I think there's still time, and I think the worse things get, people drive towards the kind of content related to the thing that happens because they're looking for a way through. And that's also why I wrote the bunker book. So anyway, bunker codes. I'm gonna go because I'm getting worn out from all the talking, but I appreciate you all, and I will talk to you all later. Bye bye.